This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Megan Ryan, Twins beat writer, will join me in just a minute here to talk all about the awful road trip for the Twins. I don't know if it could have gone much worse between the winless 0-4 stretch, the COVID pause, and exactly what happened Wednesday. I'm still not quite sure how to process everything that went on the field. Howard Sinker did a nice post on Thursday morning, StarTribune.com, that kind of takes you through all the misery of that game. But Megan Ryan and I will break that down in just a little bit. But first, what did I miss? The Wild, 5 wins now in a row since all of them since Marcus Foligno came back from injury. They've won 8 games in a row overall that Marcus Foligno has been in the lineup. Just really interesting how much he helps that team. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, just what he means to that roster, how he makes everything else kind of make sense, things like that. And he did it again Wednesday night against Arizona. A goal in the 4-1 win, 5 hits. That was a team high. And just, overall solid play, making every line meaningful. Now, what does this mean in the big picture for the Wild? Well, this 5-game winning streak has really put them in a good spot. The unfortunate part is it doesn't get them a whole lot more in the West. The divisional race, the way things go this year, the Wild very much firmly entrenched in a playoff spot. In terms of points percentage, I think it's interesting right now. The Wild has the 5th best points percentage in the NHL right now, 678. That's a very high mark. That's the mark of a very, very good team. Unfortunately, 2 of the teams above them are also in their division, Vegas and Colorado. I believe Vegas and Colorado might have the 2 best, or they're at least in the top 5 above the Wild. So, the trick here is that's going to be a really, really, really good team that comes out of the West, almost certainly, and that it's going to be hard to get out of there. But should make for some really good playoff viewing as well. But the Wild kind of stuck with a lot of really good teams behind them or in front of them, and we'll see how they're able to navigate that. But points percentage of 678, awfully good. That division, awfully good, and we'll see how they're able to navigate that for the rest of the way this season. But it certainly helps to have Marcus Foligno in the lineup, as we saw again on Wednesday.
AC out there in the flat. Is the ball thrown in low? That isn't Snelker's fault.
Let's use that Jerry Burns clip that I use sometimes as a different entry point into the Timberwolves' 128-125 loss to the Kings on Wednesday night. Wolves had a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter, could not hold on to it. And a lot of that lead was built by the bench, the reserves, who had a really, really good night. In fact, it was 112-102 when their best player, Karl Anthony Towns, came back into the game with about 7 minutes left. That's a double-digit lead right there. They end up coughing up that lead and 3 more, give up what that would be 26 points in the last 7 minutes. Defense matters, everybody. The Wolves did not execute defensively down the stretch. The good things they'd been doing largely with the bench went by the wayside in the final 7 minutes, and as a result, they were not able to win their second consecutive game who would win the first time since the first 2 games of the season. Just can't seem to string those wins together. They're 16-44 now. Not the bench's fault, though. 24 points from Naz Reid. That's second best on the team behind Towns. They had 50 combined. That's a lot from the big man. Juancho Hernangomez, 16 points. Now, Jared Vanderbilt, 4 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 block. Some really good defense. He was a plus 14 in his 16 minutes. A lot of those bench players were plus players. The only starter who was a plus player was Josh Okogie, who, wouldn't luck have it, is a good defensive player. So it takes more than just scoring the ball, especially down the stretch. I think the Wolves got away from some of those things. I think the bench had a lot of good things going. I understand the need to bring your better players, your starters back in. The hindsight would have been even trickier if you leave the bench in too long. And then they cough up the lead. They're like, why didn't you bring in the starters? So it makes sense. I don't think Chris Finch was at fault. I just think the starters didn't get the job done on a night where the bench combined to score 61 points and to play some really, really good defense. So not the bench's fault that the Wolves were not able to win their second game in a row, a low bar that they have yet to clear since the first and second games of this season.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, Go to startribune.com/subscribe.
I am happy to be joined on Daily Delivery today by Megan Ryan, who is on the road trip to end all road trips, and maybe ended the Twins. Now, it's too early to say that, but Megan, your trip out west included a COVID pause, included an 0-4 record, included getting swept in a doubleheader without scoring any runs, and then it included on Wednesday a complete debacle that can only be politely described as a extra inning meltdown, where it looked like they were finally going to win a game, even though they gave it away a couple times, and then the defense falls apart. So I thought you had told me that you were a good luck charm on a beat and not a bad luck charm. But Megan, I'm sorry, 0-4 is not a great start for the Twins right now.
Well, to be fair, it's kind of like a bespeckled record because I feel like I'm pretty good with like hockey teams in particular, and maybe college football teams, but only for 1 year. So baseball, I guess, is not one of those sports for me. I clearly have cursed this team and Kenta Maeda in particular, since he's the only one that I've done a feature on. So I'm really sorry, Kenta, that this is what it's come to. But thanks for talking to me, even though you'll never talk to me again, maybe.
Between you cursing the Twins and me cursing a lot of people who come on this podcast, this is dangerous. It's like Marcus Foligno came on the podcast and, not long after that broke his foot. So there's just been a couple instances. It's not a full blown curse yet. So let's just leave it at that. But on the field, I guess first, before we get to what happened on the field in Oakland, let's get to the COVID pause and just, everything that went into that, and just, the strangeness of a team being stranded, potentially being stranded out west. Kind of what was the process of that as it unfolded, and how did they eventually get the all clear to play, which maybe they wish they hadn't had now?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the worst time to be away from home, right? I think people say that all the time. Like, nobody wants to be sick when you're not at home. Like, and I get that the whole team didn't come down with COVID, but just allow me an analogy. Like, it's hard to be away from home and things are not going well. Like, you don't have the comfort, you don't have, for your friends or family or people to take care of you. You don't even have some of the things that maybe you like to do when you're sick or bored or whatever. Like, you don't have your pet to play with, or who knows. Like, it's just a horrible time for it to happen. And it's, one thing if they had been semi close to home or something like that, even would have helped. Just reinforcements wise of trying to get people in from St. Paul. But it's like when you're on the West Coast, it's like a 3.5-4 hour flight from where your alternate site is. And, everybody's got COVID, not everybody, but it's tough. So, what happened and we'll just go through the timeline. It's a little confusing. Anderson Simmons, before the team left for California, I think late that Wednesday night, he tested positive for COVID. And there was so he got put on the COVID IL, and that was kind of that. And then there was a brief scare the day before, I think that Thursday game, when Rocco Baldelli and another one of the coaches had a false positive. And almost didn't think that they were going to be able to travel California. And so there was this couple of hour spree on Thursday where all of a sudden everybody was trying to figure out, well, if Rocco doesn't travel, what do we do? And who takes over? And all this stuff. And then it turned out that they were false positives. So they kind of were like, okay, well, that's good. We're out of the woods. We'll go to California. And everybody tested negative when they headed off to California. But then when they got here on Friday, they had a staff member test positive, a non-uniform staff member. And so that then kind of threw things a little bit into flux again. They ended up playing on Friday, which was a 10-3 loss. But it was tough because there was a certain number of staff members that had sat around this guy on the plane. And, that is going to amount to close contact because you're within 6 feet of someone, even though you're wearing a mask and, social distance or whatever. It's just when you're on an airplane, there's only so much you can do. And they were, sitting there for 3.5 hours. So it sent probably 5 or so staff members home from the ballpark, and they were in quarantines as close contacts. And they were looking at maybe having to spend 7 days in quarantine or something, but it then eventually got downgraded to 3 because they kept testing negative. So that was Friday. And then Saturday, they had had two players test positive before the game, and Kyle Garlick, and then who we now know is Max Kepler. So they ended up having to cancel Saturday's game, cancel Sunday's game. On Sunday, they canceled Monday's game at Oakland and said, we'll do a doubleheader Tuesday, which is eventually what happened. And they didn't have any more positive tests since then, but they did have kind of a crosshair situation where Caleb Thielbar got put on the COVID IL too, not because he tested positive, but because he spent a significant amount of time with either Garlick or Kepler, or maybe both of them. So he kind of got taken out of this. And so, and then, they played the doubleheader Tuesday. Not great.
They didn't score a run, Megan. I'd say that's worse than not great. A run.
But hey, it went pretty fast, which is more than I can say for this Wednesday game. But anyways, that was kind of that, except for then today, ahead of this Wednesday game, they say that JT Riddle is all of a sudden on the COVID IL and he's on a commercial flight back to Minnesota. And that was kind of confusing because we were like, well, but he didn't test positive, did he? Because you can't put him on a commercial flight. And they're like, no. And we were like, well, is it contact tracing? But if it was, he should have been on the IL along with Thielbar. But he pinch ran in yesterday's game. And they were like, well, there's a lot of different ways you can end up on the COVID IL, which is kind of code for there was something that went on there. We don't know for sure, and it's not on the record, but obviously there are different ways that you can expose yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that you were, in contact with an infected player or whatnot. It's just that, you could have not been wearing your mask or not social distancing properly. You could be going out to dinner with somebody or hanging out with anybody outside the team bubble. It's all going to put you on that COVID IL. So it was kind of a blow because all of a sudden now they've exhausted their taxi squad, which are the only there's 5 guys that they brought over to California to travel with them in case of emergencies. And boy, did they need them. And so they exhausted this taxi squad. They've got, Cruz, who's playing injured. They've got Byron Buxton, who's not 100% from injury, but trying to put the team on his back. It didn't work out for him. God bless him. So it's just been a rough go. And, even for the players that weren't testing positive or getting put on the COVID IL, they still had to be pretty much locked in their team hotel in Anaheim for 2 straight days while they tried to figure out how big of an outbreak this is. And, is it the whole team has it or whatnot? So it's been a long couple of days that have gotten guys out of their routines where they haven't been able to take BP or, do some real legitimate throwing beyond playing catch in front of the team hotel. So they got kind of rusty, and I think mentally it's just been tough. So this has not been the greatest road trip in team's history, maybe the worst.
Yeah, I mean, through all that, I mean, they start the trip 0-3 with the 2 missed games. They made up the 2 on Tuesday, the doubleheader sweep, and you can see they're out of sorts. They come out on Wednesday though, and the offense gets on track. Kenta Maeda has a bad start though. It's kind of one of these back and forth forever games, but they're up 10-9 in the 9th. Alexander Colomé gives up the run. You're thinking, okay, here we go again. But then Byron Buxton, like you said, maybe not 100%, but he'd made a diving catch earlier to preserve the lead, at least temporarily, and then hits the home run in the 10th. You think, okay, at least they can salvage this one game. They're not going to go home with this, off day Thursday, just having this awful road trip. And then the game ends in the most excruciating fashion, right? I mean, Colomé hits a batter, walks 2 more, and then there's 2 just really unsightly errors, including the game-winning, throwing error by Luis Arias at third base. I mean, I don't even know how to describe that in just the chain of events that takes you there, because Rocco Baldelli pinch runs for Josh Donaldson. Otherwise, Josh Donaldson's probably playing third base. Luis Arias is probably playing second base still. So maybe you probably don't even get that ground ball to third if Luis Arias is still playing second. Maybe he makes that play instead of Blankenship, and at least Donaldson probably makes that play at third. It's just so much to think about in that 10th inning. What was the post game? I hesitate to even ask what the mood was post game, because the mood on Twitter was not great, Megan.
Well, the mood on Twitter is never great, to be honest. Twins fans are a sad bunch, like Gophers.
They're 6-11 though. I mean, they're a happy bunch when things are going well. When they were 5-2, they were pretty. They were a lot happier when they were 5-2.
Bandwagoners. I mean, nobody sticks through their teams thick and thin. Post game mood was not great. I mean, it's tough again. This is where I kind of miss. Not that you want to go into a clubhouse after a bad loss and everyone's surly, but it does give you a bit of an emotion, and you can kind of read what's happening. And I did ask Rocco, after the game, I was like, can you just tell me when you guys are walking off the field into the dugout back to the clubhouse after that, like after losing the game on like two pretty egregious errors, what is it like? Like, is it silent? Are people like beating themselves up? Are people yelling? Like, I just kind of want to know. And he basically said, like, there's just nothing anybody could say because we all know what happened, and you just like, you can't take it back. And like, it's obvious like what happened and whose fault it was and like whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like it's a huge thing, and there's just nothing really anybody can say to make anybody feel better, which is fair. But that is what I am finding so interesting about this team, and what I've been trying to ask some of the guys and Rocco over the last couple of days is like, it is evident that there is something going on with this team. And I don't think it's some like horrible structural, like we got to fire Rocco. I don't think that's the case, even though the people in my mentions want to see that. I just think that there's a big mental thing coming on here where they started this season in tough circumstances, right? Like, number one, COVID. I get the fact that we're all dealing with COVID, but like, it's hard. They didn't have a breakout last year. They didn't have to postpone games last year because of it. So like, that's a new thing that they've all of a sudden had to deal with. The fact that Mike Bell, their bench coach, passed away right before the season, and that happened really quickly, like from when he was diagnosed to when he died. Like, it,
yeah, good point.
That kind of took them all by, that kind of shocked them all. And I know that he'd only been the bench coach for a season at the time, but like, that's still something that can kind of rock teams and kind of put them off on the wrong foot, especially when it happens right before the season is about to start. And then you just combine everything that's going on in Minneapolis, which, like, I get that they're trying to say like, oh, we're not worried about Dante Wright and the Chauvin verdict and all that stuff. But when there's major events that are happening in your community and you're seeing, maybe a street you've been on and there's like, a protest on it, or, you're seeing like, all these people that are in this place that you play for, it can take a toll, or it can just, I don't even want to say the word distract because it's not the right word, but it can occupy your mental space. So they've kind of had these three big whammies that have all kind of compounded onto each other. And then you just add in like being away from home, and you add in the results on the field, just kind of continuing to just, again, pile up on each other. And it's just tough to swing out of, especially like I look at the stuff that happened in the past couple of games, and like the crazy fluky things that don't normally happen. Like, again, you could talk about the error from Arise, right? Like, that was egregious. But earlier in the game, when Maeda had, like in the very first inning, when Maeda thought he could have fielded this ball and it took a bounce off the mound, like Arise was the one who came and covered that for him and still got the out at first. So like, he was making really solid defensive plays earlier in the game, and he'd been doing that in the other losses too. Or you look at, like, there was an out that Josh Donaldson was supposed to have, and the ball got stuck in the netting of his glove.
Right.
Like, there's just weird things where it's like, it feels like you guys are doing everything right, but it's not enough. And so I tried to kind of get at that after the game, but I think it's hard for them to kind of admit, like, I don't know. None of these like sports figures want to say like, oh yeah, like we're bad, and sure does hurt. They want to keep a positive attitude, which I get, but it's tough. I keep asking some of the players, like, what do you do to just, like, when you're in a slump, how do you take yourself out of it? Or just like when you're feeling bad about life, what do you do to make you happy? And I even asked Kent Maeda after this game about that, and he basically was like, I don't think I'm going to smile again until we win.
So that's like at least like 48 hours, because they don't play on Thursday. Like, that's gonna be a long stoic scene for Kenta.
I know, and it's just so, like, I kind of feel for him, honestly, because I traveled here, obviously, great road trip, but I was watching the A's pregame, and now they're on an 11 game.
Right, they're an 11 game winning streak, right?
So they're pretty happy, but it was really interesting to watch their batting practice, and they're playing hacky sack, they're joking around, they're like doing a team stretch, like they look really cohesive and kind of happy to be around each other. And I look at the Twins batting practices the past couple of days, and it hasn't been like that. I mean, people have kind of maybe stood around and talked to each other a little bit, but there hasn't really been a ton of laughing that I've seen. They certainly haven't been like doing pickup games of futsal or whatever. Like, it just doesn't I haven't even seen that. So it is really telling to me just from that point of view that there is a little bit of a dire mood around this team. And how they turn that around, I don't know. If I were in the clubhouse, maybe I could figure it out a little bit better. But
Yeah.
so far, I am not.
Couple more things. One interesting thing I saw on Twitter, one constructive thing I saw on Twitter, which is hard to find. Trevor Plouffe, former Twins third baseman, tweeted about that ball that Arias had and how in Oakland, because there's such a massive foul territory behind first base that throws from third base, your depth perception, if you're caught flat-footed, which I think Arias was kind of on his back foot, it can seem like that throw to first base is forever away. It kind of messes with your mind. So I'm not giving Luis a pass on that. The throw was way, way off. But I thought that was an interesting perspective from someone who's played plenty of games in Oakland. The other piece that I want to mention was we didn't even get to, the fact that injuries have hit them really hard already this season. You had Donaldson on the IR right away, or the IL right away. You had Buxton out for a while, and now it looks like Cruz and Sano. Do we have an update on Nelson Cruz and Miguel Sano? I mean, Nelson Cruz hit 2 home runs today, so I don't know how bad it was, but where are we at health-wise with those guys as they get prepared to play back at Target Field on Friday?
Yeah, and true Nelson Cruz like fashion, he's never been about the running of the bases. He's about hitting the big balls, and so like that's what he did. Like he was obviously not 100%. He late in the doubleheader, he took a pitch off his like right ankle area, and it kind of hobbled him at the time. He kind of limped off, and they put a pinch runner in for him. And we'd asked after the game like, what's going on with that? And they're like, oh, we'll evaluate, we'll see. And he played today, so that was a good sign. But at the same time, it's like, he had to hit 2 home runs because he would not, if it was a base hit, I don't think he could have made it to first before they threw him out, because like the slow trot that he was doing around the bases, and it wasn't just to like soak in, hit in the home run.
He's hit enough home runs. He doesn't need to soak him in.
Exactly. He just like literally, it took him a long time to get around because his ankle was not up to par. And so I think as the game went on, it just continued to kind of swell up and stiffen up, and they kept wrapping it and icing it in the dugout. But eventually they kind of had to sit him because it just, he couldn't do anything more, and he had contributed 2 home runs, which is good. And I gave him a lot of credit for playing because, again, their depth is tested. They've exhausted their taxi squad. There's just like really not a lot more options you have. And especially with Sano. So Sano didn't play in the second game of the doubleheader yesterday, and he also didn't play today. And that was because he apparently, had a tight hamstring situation, right hamstring, after the first game of the doubleheader. And so they've just been evaluating it. And I guess they deemed that he wasn't ready to go yet. But, hamstrings are kind of a tough thing. We've had a couple of them on the Twins here already. And, people, sometimes they take longer to come back from, and sometimes they're back in a couple of days. It just kind of depends. So it's kind of unknown, but obviously, Miguel Sano has been having a bit of a tough time as well at the plate. So there was some suspicion that maybe he wasn't playing the doubleheader against the lefty because, his hitting had not been great, especially against lefties. But I think it's an injury thing, so they say. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see if, a day off tomorrow is good enough for Nelson and Miguel to get back.
Got it. Well, and one thing we can't forget too is this team, even though they started 5-2, things had started to kind of go downhill even before the COVID scare. But this is definitely, seems like it took a piece, like you said, took a significant piece out of them on this trip. And I know they have the off day Thursday, but I thought one thing that was interesting, I'll just kind of a final thought. I don't know if Rocco got asked about this post game on Wednesday, but I feel like they've taken great pains to protect their pitchers this year. The starters don't go too deep. The bullpen, they tried to protect Taylor Rogers in particular, not working him too hard. Colome winds up throwing 49 pitches Wednesday just because of the nature of that second inning. And it just struck me as like, you do all these things and then Colome ends up throwing like the equivalent of, like a 4-inning start in a normal game. Is just one of those things where I don't know what else they could have done except maybe bring in Alcala, but it just turned out to be another one of those, unfortunate moments in the game.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the bullpen, I think, has gotten their fair share of flack so far this season. And, I get that, but I also think and Kenta Maeda mentioned this as well after the game, like it starts with him. Like when he only goes 3 innings, it just puts you in a tough situation to try to manage it. And I mean, not everyone was terrible. I mean, Taylor Rogers did a pretty bang up job for the innings that he was in there, and he had to maybe do a little bit of a heavier load than he was expecting as well. But it's just tough, and when you can't put a game away, like it makes it a really tough situation, especially when you just aren't in a blowout situation where you can just put Astudillo in and have him lob some
Right.
46-mile-per-hour strikes. So it's not been great. But again, it's like I don't know what else they could have done. Their hands are really tied when you have the depth and the personnel that you have, and then you just can't, for some reason, close out a game, even when your offense is finally doing really good, which it hadn't been for the past couple of games.
I think the thing they need to do is just play 9-inning games. They're 6-3 in 9-inning games and 0-8 in 7 or extra inning games this year. Megan Ryan, great stuff. Thanks for joining me from this road trip to end all road trips. I hope the next one's a little bit more successful. I hope you ate some good food, at least on this trip, because that's a fun piece of all this. And we'll chat again soon, all right?
Thanks, Rand.
Good talking to Megan. I really appreciated her big picture perspective, because you can get kind of bogged down in the games, the errors, things like that. And you can kind of forget that these are human beings and that there's a lot going on that has been thrown at this team already this season. And that can at least start to explain some of what we're seeing on the field, and that, hopefully we'll see some of that start to fade, and we'll see the team that I think this can become, which is a much better team at the very least than what we've seen on the field, in these last 9 or 10 games. Let's end with the cooler. Let's talk about the European Super League soccer in a local context. This is a league that I didn't even get to talk about as it was starting to form, because it disbanded so quickly, or at least it seems like it will disband so quickly. Kind of brought out on a Sunday, this past Sunday, and by Tuesday, pretty much every team had pulled out of it because it was such a bad deal. Basically, a bunch of rich owners getting together, trying to put all the richest, most popular teams from Europe, various countries, into one league. Guess what? Everybody hated the idea. They were going to ban the players from playing in the World Cup, and next thing you know, it's not happening. Well, I wanted to know, aside from the hubris of these owners and other things, like if they tried something like this in North American sports, what Minnesota teams would qualify for a 12-team Super League, which is what this league was going to be. So here, out of the top 6 leagues in North America, here's how I had it shaking down in terms of Minnesota teams. WNBA, that's an easy one. There's only 12 teams to begin with, so all of them would obviously make the cut, and the Lynx obviously make that. But even if they trim that in half or even cut it to 4 teams, the Lynx make that cut because they're one of the WNBA's model franchises. So easy one there. Another easy one in the opposite direction, the Wolves. Lowest winning percentage in the history of major North American sports teams right now. That's not great, you guys. So they're routinely in the bottom of attendance. They would get nowhere near a 12-team Super League for basketball. Borderline, but out. The Wild, sorry, the Wild would not make it. There'd be an outcry here, I know, but this is not really one of the 12 most prestigious teams in the NHL. Franchise value is down in the bottom half of the league at least. We're not in the biggest media market. It's close, but I say the Wild misses the cut. It winds up in whatever lower tier league that comes out of this. The Twins, they don't make the cut either. A lot of country music concerts at Target Field with the revenue they need to make up to after the Twins are relegated. At least now, maybe now they win a playoff game. Maybe now they win a playoff game. That's the silver lining. Borderline but in, I said the Vikings make the cut in a 12-team Super NFL league. The 7th best winning percentage in league history, a sizable following, a new stadium. I think they make it. I think they're one of the 12 biggest franchises in the NFL. And Minnesota United, I say the Loons make it too. Brand new franchise, soccer-specific stadium. I think they're growing into being one of the top clubs in Major League Soccer. So that's how I see it. Super League failed. This would never happen here, of course. This was just a thought exercise, which is probably about what the actual Super League in Europe amounted to. And another good reminder that if you complain enough about a bad idea, people will take notice, and it does not have to happen. That'll do it for today. Good stuff coming tomorrow. Marcus Fuller, our Gophers basketball beat writer, will join me along with Jamison Battle, one of the newest members of the Gophers, former De La Salle player, transferred from George Washington. Looking forward to that conversation. Thanks for listening today. Download this podcast, subscribe to it, write a review if you can. Always subscribe to Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. I'm Michael Rand. I will talk to you again on Friday.